Hi, everybody. It's Monday. We should be having a live broadcast of Toltec discussions with Golden Eagle tonight, full of all sorts of witty wisdom. Tonight, however, we are not live. We are having a very short recorded message. A lot going on up here in Mounting Shasta. We just finished about 3 really massively busy weeks, and we have another event coming up this weekend down in Reading. It's a holistic fair. We'll be promoting the Akadwa. We'll be promoting my new book, Heal Your Life, Heal the World. And so there's a lot of preparation for that event. So we're not meeting and having a big shindig today. I did, however, want to take a sip of my beverage and then share with you some thoughts that have been on my mind lately that are directly related to the Toltec philosophies and to the use of the Akadwa energy. When you think back to 2015, when the gearing up for the primaries for the presidential election were starting, I want you to remember the first thought that came to your mind when Donald Trump said he was going to run for election. And he was running as a Republican, despite the fact that for much of his life he's been a registered Democrat, I am told. I personally have never inspected his voter registration records. After a very short time, it became clear that every single one of the other Republicans in the race were completely lame idiots. And it became very clear to me as early as 2015 that Donald Trump was going to win the Republican nomination. Now, all my friends told me, "You're nuts. There ain't no way." Wish I'd had bets with them all, because that's exactly what happened. And if not by the end of 2015, certainly by early in 2016, it became clear to me that if Donald Trump were to run against any of the Democratic candidates in the mix, other than Bernie Sanders, that he would win. And I so stated before the Democratic convention that eventually nominated Hillary. As you know by now, voter fraud was rampant, and the Democratic National Convention or Committee has publicly acknowledged, "Oh yeah, we cheated, we broke the law, but too bad." And we get what we saw. I mean, this was very clearly choreographed from the get-go that Donald Trump was going to be the next president. Since that time, we've also ushered in the era of what we now call fake news. Prior to the formal era of publicly admitting fake news was going on, we had the era of propaganda, where everyone still pretended that what was being said was true. And that goes back well over 100 years. Every war the United States has participated in, since at least the Spanish-American War, the one where we went charging up the hill in Cuba and all of that, every war since then, for more than 100 years, has been precipitated on fake news, staged events, and so forth. How many millions of people, of our own people, have to be killed in these fake wars before we collectively are going to stand up and say no. No fake news, no fake propaganda, no fake weapons of mass destruction, no fake whatever the excuse was for going into Libya, which we all know now was about the central banking systems and the gold standard that Gaddafi was trying to implement to free himself from the Rothschild banking family. In this era of fake news, it has become more and more and more obvious to anyone with a modicum of historical knowledge that great efforts are being spent by the propaganda arm of the U.S. government, also known as mainstream media, which is very clearly long since abandoned any semblance of being journalists. That great effort is being taken to divide our country on a variety of issues. And if you look at one issue, and that one doesn't divide you, the next one probably will. The issues might be over race. There's still people who are horribly offended by another group of people whose ancestors happen to naturally produce more melanin in their skin than your own race. And how race gets defined these days is extremely fluid, so why are we arguing over race? When absolutely lily white, pure as snow skin people have 2% African American DNA, why do we care? At what point do we accept the fact that we're a human race and we are here to learn to get along? After race, probably the biggest divisive subject seems to be these days religion. Not that there's ever been any wars in human history over religion, like one Christian sect killing 40,000 members of another Christian sect over whatever obscure nuances there may be in which way they make the sign of the cross, meaning right to left or left to right. Apparently it means something to those who believe in the sign of the cross. And why some Christians still obsess over the ancient Roman method of execution is beyond me, personally. Race, religion, money, immigration status is another big one, especially if we create fear of measles. So vaccination status versus unvaccination status. Tall people versus short people. Fat people versus thin people. City people versus rural people. And that one, mark my words, is going to become very important in the next 2 to 5 years. Great distrust is going to be sown by city people or by the propagandists to create a fear of rural people among city people and vice versa. Realize that if you buy into one of these dualistic standards, you are buying in to the propaganda that is interfering with the growth and development and advancement of humanity. There's many more of these continuums, the left versus the right politically. Those of us who are trying to wake up the rest of the world to this artificial duality that's been created that actually has zero basis in fact. We're now being ridiculed for being conspiracy theorists. Well, that's been going on for a while, but it's gotten worse. Trivia question is, do you know where the term conspiracy theorist came from? I'll wait. Raise your hands all at once if you know. It grew out of the investigation into the assassination of then President John F. Kennedy. When the Warren Commission report was issued, the official report by the commission led by Warren into who shot JFK, and it concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and it overlooked 100 other facts and laws of physics. That report was so obviously full of holes that many, many people by the thousands immediately questioned it and challenged it and realized they were up against a conspiracy of vast proportions, even back in 1963. And so to discredit them, the CIA created the term conspiracy theorist. It is unknown, at least to me, if that term had been created at that time for that specific purpose, or if that was a term that they had sitting around in their bank someplace ready to pull it off the shelves and use it when the opportunity required it. But that's probably when the vast majority of the divisiveness began, or began to be exposed. JFK was about to expose it all. He was about to expose all the forces behind the government. He was about to eliminate the Federal Reserve banking system. He had ordered the withdrawal from Vietnam, calling it a useless war. And within days, he was dead. So this divisiveness, this modern era of awareness of the divisiveness, dates back to 1963, which is 64 years ago now. Longer than, no, not 64 years ago, 18 and 37, 55 years ago. Yeah, I was 3. So you do the math, you know how old I am. So still, 55 years is longer than some of you have actually been alive. I don't remember hearing the words JFK was shot, but I do remember as a child watching his funeral on television and not really understanding at the time what was going on. That awareness came later. And quite frankly, it's still being revealed. All of these divisive issues are intended to keep us from one thing, and that's from uniting. The Toltec philosophy is all about community. Community and the spiritual work of that community, which we call transcendence. Community is facilitated when we nurture our collective consciousness. It's tough to develop the collective consciousness of a community if every member in the community is in survival mode 24/7. And so what's going on is a slow degradation of modern culture intended to produce exactly that, 24/7 survival mode. In parts of the world, that has been implemented, even as we speak. The Middle East comes to mind, parts of Africa, parts of Asia are already there. Some regions of Central and South America are there. Quite frankly, there are regions here in the United States that are there. Certain inner cities, that's the reality. Less so in rural areas. So what this message today is a call to action, to embrace the Toltec concepts of community. Community shares a few things above and beyond merely living in the same place by chance. Community requires a knowledge of your shared history. We now have in the American public educational system a trend towards not teaching valid, accurate history. Not about the founding of our country, not even about historical events in our country. Many of those are outright forgeries in the textbooks being used today. So first step is you need to know your history. First as our country, second as your state and community, and third as the human race as a whole. We have our immediate neighbors to the north are Canadians in the country of Canada, and our immediate neighbors to the south are Mexicans in the country that we call Mexico. How many of you who live here in the U.S. know the history of Canada or Mexico? You should. They're our neighbors. Get to know them. In addition to a shared history, a community has a sense of shared values. Maybe we value freedom, or claim to. Maybe we value our spiritual freedom in particular. Whatever the values are, take a good look at what the divisive attempts of mass media and the government and the corporations that have apparently bought all the politicians are trying to do, which is they are trying to attack values, whether they are moral values of right and wrong, based on a humanistic point of view, or whether they're moral values of right and wrong based on a religious point of view. It's amazing to me how many world religions can all agree that there is one God, that there is a version of the Golden Rule, which basically says, do unto each other, do unto your neighbor as you would have your neighbor do unto you. Love thy neighbor as yourself. Some version of that. Every major religion has that. And then almost every major religion turns around and violates those tenets almost daily, continuously, 24/7. It's why religion has a bad name. It's why Americans in particular, as well, following the lead of the Europeans, are rejecting religion in droves. A mistake, however, would be to reject God or to reject the spiritual nature of the universe. You can reject an organized religion that doesn't practice what it preaches or practice what it professes. But I caution you, do not reject God. Do not reject your own divine nature. Do not reject the fact that you have a true purpose in life, your true will, your dharma or destiny, whatever name you pick. It's the one reason you're here. And you will not accomplish it. You will not be successful if you reject God. The Akadwa is an energy, a force, a power that has been used by the Toltecs and our ancestors, even before our ancestors were called Toltecs, for tens of thousands of years. And yes, I do mean those numbers. If you happen to be watching this and are not familiar with the true history of the Toltecs, then yes, I really mean that. The Akadwa enables each of us to better fully integrate all aspects of ourself. our higher energy bodies, the portions of our consciousness associated with each of those higher bodies, all the way back to our true divine source, what we call our essential self. And by we, I mean not just Toltecs, but most of the different systems of spiritual philosophy that are teaching legitimate truth over the eons. In order to have the best possible chance of enhancing the collective consciousness of your community, you need enough people in your community to wake up to this reality. You need enough people who have worked on developing their own consciousness, that those communal links to the collective consciousness are more greatly enhanced and therefore more effective. So your homework, if you want to call it that, is to stop allowing yourself to be divided on superficial reasons of skin color or hair color or how your neighbor chooses to worship his deity. Stop allowing yourself to be divided over superficial boundary lines such as who lives in a city and who lives in a country. Who is a suburbanite and has a nice, juicy corporate job versus who is a mere farmer who lowers himself to scratching in the dirt to produce food for others. The day may come where you need a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. But the day has come where you need a farmer. Most of us use the produce of farmers several times a day whenever we eat. If you value your life, then you should value high quality food you put into your body, which means you should value the farmers who produce that high quality food. Do not allow yourself to be falsely divided. Second, learn your history. Third, know what values you stand for and why. And finally, project those values into the community, not by your speech or your writings, but by your actions. If you profess to be a Christian and you are not following the one commandment Christ told you to follow, to love one another as he loved us, then I would challenge you that you are not truly a disciple of Christ. And you are not worthy to call yourself by that name. If you are a Christian or any other member of any other religion that professes to follow the Golden Rule, and yet you advocate violence against members of other religions for no other reason than they are of a different religion, then I admonish you that you are not practicing a religion. If your religion requires you to kill someone because they are not of your faith, you are not in a religion, you are in a cult. If you have any excuse or rationalization for not living up to the tenets of your religion, then you are not a true practitioner of that religion. And if your religion requires you to violate the Golden Rule in any way, at any time, for any reason, then I would tell you it's time to get yourself a new religion. It's time to challenge politicians everywhere and hold them accountable. If you are a manager in a corporation and your corporate policies are strictly aimed at harming people for profits, then you need to change your corporate policies. If you are a corporate shareholder and you see the corporation that you jointly own disobeying any of these rules or laws, it's time to pick up the phone and call corporate headquarters and demand to speak to your employee, the CEO, and tell them to change their ways. If you are a consumer, I challenge you to stop spending money at companies which violate human principles. If you are a holder of the Akadwa, you've heard me before say that yes, you are to use the Akadwa for the benefit of all beings everywhere. But most importantly, it is to use the Akadwa. Use it daily. Use it constantly. Use it with your meditations. Use it with your visualizations that are intended to bring a change to the human collective consciousness. Get involved and lead by example. Our culture's purpose is the transcendence and the evolution of the human race. Not just some of the human race, but all of the human race, all of humanity. Not just the people who are in this week's Cool Kids Club as defined by the mainstream media, which is bound to change next week. Any doubt? Just look back over the last year's headlines and see who's been cool and who hasn't. Use the Akadwa, use it for your own conscious development, use it to develop your own community. Get to know your community through history and values. Know what your values are and why. And stop allowing yourself to be divided. See the bigger picture. See the whole chessboard. And remember, you're here for a reason. You're here for your true will. That is what you need to do. All right, everyone. That's it for today. This is Golden Eagle signing off from Mount Shasta. Do good, avoid evil.